That's futuristic. That's like...
Yeah.
Meet John Kennelly.
15 months later, that company got bought by Google. A couple years after that, I worked for a startup that got acquired by Apple.
He's a startup legend that you've never heard of.
A lot of the things that brands were accustomed to in an e-commerce world, we provided in a physical setting.
On his way to the top when disaster struck.
So were you guys at like around 20 million and practically overnight you guys shut off, like you were saying, a faucet?
He's here to share with us the lessons that he's learned.
It's easy to just blame COVID for all of our problems. But what I have no problem saying now is that COVID revealed a lot of the flaws of our business.
And how he's recovered.
There's a very specific thing that I love to do, and the business that I'm running today allows me to do it repeatedly, do it with one company, move on.
Welcome to Founder's Ascent.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Founder's Ascent. This is the podcast where we look into the ascent of founders across the world. I'm your co-host, Gavin, joined with my co-host, BJ. And today we have a very special guest, John Kennelly. He's the founder of F3 Collective, Magistrate, and b8ta. And John has had a lot of highs and lows over the course of his career as a founder. And today we're going to dive into those. It's good to have you on, John.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Of course. But yeah, so I kind of want to dig into this story of b8ta to begin with. So like, how did you get into entrepreneurship? Sort of what led into b8ta? What led into this idea of, I guess, storytelling and helping these founders find their niche better?
Yeah, so I mean, I think getting into entrepreneurship is a direct effect of living in San Francisco from 2009 to 2019. Moved there straight out of college. Actually, my first job was very much not a startup. I worked for Accenture straight out of college, so Can't get much larger and more corporate than that. And yeah, did that for 2 years. And honestly, I was living in San Francisco, in some cases flying across the country, wearing a suit to work every day. All my colleagues were 50 plus years old, which back then especially seemed very old. Doesn't seem that old to me now, but we'll table that. But yeah, I was going to work in an environment that wasn't fun, wasn't challenging, wasn't interesting, very corporate, very slow. And all my friends were wearing shorts and flip-flops to work and playing beer pong at their office. And, you know, when you're 22, 23 years old, that seems like way more fun, you know, regardless of how much the job pays or anything like that. So, yeah, in 2011, I went to work for a social media marketing startup, took a huge leap, giant pay cut, all those things. 15 months later, that company got bought by Google. A couple years after that, I worked for a startup that got acquired by Apple. And so 2 of the first 3 startups I worked for had these really big successes. You know, I was just kind of a mid-level employee, so not like, you know, was retiring off of either of those, but it was cool to go through that experience. And yeah, I think just being in San Francisco at that time, you know, it was just infectious. Everywhere you looked, somebody was starting a tech company. And so I wanted to be involved in that. To answer the kind of b8ta specific portion of the question, after I went through the Apple acquisition, that was an augmented reality software company that I worked for. They basically did an engineering kind of acqui-hire. They bought the tech, they bought the engineers. They gave business folks like myself the opportunity to kind of take a job at Apple or take a package to leave. You know, at the time, commuting to Cupertino and working a, you know, enterprise sales job at Apple wasn't super appealing to me. So I took the package and left. And really my goal was to be a co-founder or sort of the first employee at a startup, and sort of put that out in the universe. And an old colleague from Google knew somebody who had just raised a little bit of pre-seed and was looking for somebody to kind of spin the business up. Didn't have any retail experience, didn't have any electronics experience. So on paper wasn't a perfect fit for b8ta, but I was a grinder. And so, you know, joined that team. b8ta literally started in a garage. So that was certainly, you know, a very quintessential Silicon Valley experience, getting started in a garage like that.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, and for our audience who doesn't know, what is b8ta? What was sort of the thought in the product and the target?
Yeah, so we were founded in 2015, and around that time was very much kind of when smart home IoT companies like Nest were really starting to boom. My co-founders all came from Nest through the Google acquisition. Nest had a ton of success in brick and mortar retail. They spent a lot of money with Home Depot and Lowe's and Target, and a lot of their success was because they really invested in experiences within retail. A product like a smart thermostat, which no one had really heard of before, you needed to kind of touch it and, turn that wheel on the Nest to see, why would I pay $250 for a thermostat? And they had that success in brick and mortar, but realized that to the typical brands that maybe had just raised Series A, fresh off of Kickstarter, there really wasn't a path to getting your product into physical retail. Best Buy was taking 18 plus months to get brands in there. They also required really high minimum order quantities, so brands were required to raise a ton of capital to manufacture with no guarantee that their product would sell. So there just wasn't a good path for up and coming, especially electronics brands, to get into retail. And so even though, this is almost 10 years ago now, things were really moving aggressively to e-commerce, we basically decided to be contrarian and create an offline platform for brands to bring their products to market and actually be able to engage with customers in the physical world. So we had physical stores that were powered by technology. So we provided brands with real-time analytics around how their product was performing in store. We also had a process where, at the beginning, I was the only person kind of doing brand outreach. Eventually had a team responsible for that. But at the beginning, if you spoke to me within 15, 16 days, I could have your product on the shelf at b8ta from the first time we spoke. So, compare that to 18 months at Best Buy. We really changed the game from that perspective. And so, we really just wanted to provide an in-person home for these brands who otherwise people might only otherwise see on Kickstarter or on Instagram. So started in Palo Alto. First store opened December of 2015 in Palo Alto. By the end of 2019, we had 23 locations around the US. And at that point, I think 4 globally. So also did a number of retailer partnerships, but very focused on kind of zigging while the world zagged, which I'm sure we'll get to later, ended up being costly, but on the ascent, to stick onto the theme of the podcast, being contrarian was very effective for us.
Yeah. So what's the key, what kind of data were you providing these companies? What kind of analytics were helping them see to actually make sure that their product does take off?
Yeah. So, one was sales, right? Obviously that's a given. Sales was not really key to our model. Our business model was brands paid us a subscription fee for their placement in the store, and they kept 100% of the proceeds from the sale of the products. So we set it up that way for a very intentional reason. We didn't want to be salesy in the store. We wanted people to come in, shop, buy if they wanted to, or go online and buy from the brand directly if they wanted to, right? We didn't want to incentivize our salespeople to have people to make a purchase. We wanted to create that kind of discovery environment. So sales we did provide for the brands. Some brands chose not to sell with us, which was their choice. They didn't have to stock us with inventory. But for brands that sold, we provided sales data. And then we partnered with a company called Retail Next, who had machine learning cameras where we actually tracked how much time people spent with products in the store.
Nice.
What percentage of people who walked past the product actually stopped and spent 5 seconds or more with it. We had proprietary digital displays in store so brands could change out their marketing collateral in real time. Compare that to traditional retail where you manufacture a piece of cardboard and you're stuck with it for a year. You could literally change your display. You could run campaigns. So because we didn't hold inventory on margin, we held it on consignment. If you want to run a flash sale in our store and do $10 off for 5 hours, you could do that. Right. So brands had control over their presence, and they also had some sense of how much time are people spending with the product. So if they did make changes, they could kind of monitor, okay, when we change the font or we change the imagery, more people tend to stop by the product. So it was a lot of the things that brands were accustomed to in an e-commerce world, we provided in a physical setting.
That's futuristic. That's like,
yeah.
I'm learning about all this stuff like A/B testing, search engine marketing, like that sort of stuff.
Sure.
And I could see how you could do that in store and get so much interesting and valuable data.
Yeah, it was fun. Definitely. It's fun to look back on, all the parts of it that were pretty cutting edge for sure. I'm surprised nobody is kind of reborn this concept, and I think eventually something like this will come again. But the initial response from brands was really positive, and from retailers. We were constantly having kind of retail execs from big box retailers try to secret shop us. We tried to have a Rolodex of, hey, here's what the CEOs of all the biggest retailers look like. Keep an eye out for these guys in the store. So there was a lot of eyes on us within the first couple of years for sure.
That's interesting, because you guys closed down basically COVID time, and I still haven't even heard of this idea. Like it still sounds like we're so far out from having this. And like, did you ever think about bringing this back after COVID? Because so was this the company that you guys? So were you guys at like around 20 million, and practically overnight you guys shut off, like you were saying, a faucet? So
yeah, I mean, so basically, I think I think the story is a little bit more. Depends on the setting, right? Depending on who I'm talking to, it's easy to just blame COVID for all of our problems, right?
Sure,
it is true that we were a business that was 100% reliant on in-person foot traffic, right? That was essentially what we were monetizing. We made money off of the fact that a lot of people came to our stores that were in high traffic locations all around the world, right? So yes, basically overnight, we had to shut down. We were very much non-essential retail. All of our stores shut down, and our revenue was 100% derived from stores, right? So as soon as that happens, we obviously have to stop billing the brands that are paying these millions of dollars, combined across all the stores, and figure out what do we do next, right? The reality, right, is if we had a slightly more diversified revenue stream, right, if we weren't completely 100% reliant on these stores, then we could have weathered the storm a bit more easily. And the way we could have done that is a couple fold, right? The first one is we did have, technology that had garnered interest from retailers, right, to license our tech in their stores, right? Technology partnerships, like I said, the digital displays we built. When we first opened, they were iPads that ran our software. Eventually, we started custom manufacturing these digital displays that were operated remotely by brands. We had often talked about turning that into its own line of business, and just never got it off the ground. And by the time we had a chance to do it, it was too late, right? So hindsight's 2020, obviously. But if we had a robust technology business, right, even if we had partnered with companies like Target, who boomed during COVID because it was the only place you could shop or what have you, right? Essential retail still did really well. If we had made some inroads there, we may have had a better time weathering the storm. And obviously, long term, a technology business would have been a lot more scalable than a physical brick and mortar, business. Another sort of catch-22 of being a venture funded company is to raise as much money as we did. We had to promise substantial growth. Because we grew so fast, we had 23 locations in the US when COVID hit, and that was a huge amount of overhead, right? So our expenses, while the revenue gets shut off, the expenses don't get shut off. And that in itself, our growth sort of was crippling, right? If we only had 8 stores when COVID hit, maybe we weather the storm a little bit better and we stick around, right? So yes, like the truth is, I think the business would have, we'd still be 2 years later, we'd still be operating today in some fashion if, this sort of once in a generation thing doesn't happen. But what I have no problem saying now is that COVID revealed a lot of the flaws of our business, right? And I think that's true of probably a lot of companies. And it was certainly the case for us. All the things that were wrong about our business, COVID poured gasoline on that stuff, right? So, it's a convenient story to be able to tell that, I can just kind of blame COVID for b8ta not working. I don't know if it would have ultimately, would we have gotten acquired or IPO'd if COVID doesn't come along? I don't know, right? Because the business was certainly not perfect. It's just that COVID very much accelerated all the problems that, frankly, we were already having. So I honestly, feel like I went on a rant there. Hopefully I answered your question. I kind of forget where we started there, but hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, you definitely did. And we were, so another founder that we've had on was saying that if you could start a company in, economic downturns, your company's obviously going to do really well when the upturn hits. And a lot of the funding, like people will throw $500,000 at random companies that may not necessarily be the best during when times are good, right? And so, yeah, like when times are really, really bad, it's always going to magnify those problems, and it's always going to make those problems way worse. And so, like, if you could do well during those downturns, you could do well anytime. And so,
yeah, I mean, I think you make a great point, and timing is sometimes everything, right? I think if you took the concept that we had and you wanted to start it in like March of 2022, when we felt like COVID was really behind us, it probably would have been a smash hit, right?
Yeah,
because not only were people kind of clamoring for these in-person experiences, but this was something that happened to us. All of these landlords had to kick out tenants and evict tenants, and there was tons of vacancies in the real estate world. So we would have been able to get locations really, really cheaply and probably start this business, much cheaper than we did, right? We started our business, we raised capital in a time when times were good, right? So we had a premium on all of our expenses and our fundraising. So if you flip that in reverse, it's a much cheaper business to run. We probably could have raised capital at a higher, valuation. And hindsight, again, 2020 ifs and buts. Mm-hmm. But to your point, we didn't start in an economic downtime. We had to try to weather the fifth year of the business through an economic, downtime. And I think the uncertain nature also of COVID, sort of the fact that like we never quite knew when it was over, right? I think if we knew in March 2020, if we knew that by the summer of 2021, things would be relatively normal, maybe we could have planned for that, right? But it was always sort of like stops and starts, and should we reopen? Should we not reopen? Right? I think that we couldn't really plan or get our resources together properly because of the uncertainty, right? There was no clear, this is the day that the world will resume. That was uniquely, I think, challenging for us too.
I'm just caught up by like the psychology of all this. Like you have this idea that feels like you're building the future, right? A phenomenal idea. And then, like you said, this once in generation thing hits and all of that just disappears. And I find it hard not to fall into either paranoia about all these other once in a lifetime things that could happen, or like nihilism that, but all of this could go away. All the hard work we did could just evaporate. Like 6 years, right? Evaporated.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was close to 7 years. I mean, that was for everybody. It was, it was about 7 years for the folks that were in it at the beginning. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's easy to say this now. I certainly was not as like zen about it back then. But I think, you can only control what you can control, right? And there's certainly always going to be things that happen that are outside of your control. Now, I think what I've learned now that, if I were to start something like this again, which I don't think I will, but if I did, right, I think having a little bit more variety in the revenue stream is one way to protect yourself from things like this, right? Now, having said that, if we had all these deals with retailers who were also struggling, would they have paid their bills as our technology partner? Maybe not. Maybe we would have ended up in the same place, right? But I do think that the biggest learning is just, if our revenue stream was a little bit more dynamic, we might have had a better chance to survive. But yeah, ultimately, I mean, there's always going to be circumstances outside of your control. And I think that, having that perspective of, all you can do is give the effort you can and control what you can. That's sometimes easier said than done, but ultimately you can't, if we all sat around worrying about the once in a generation things that could happen tomorrow, I think everybody would just be curled up into a ball and nobody would get anything done. Right. So you don't really get a lot of value from worrying about that stuff. Yeah.
That what you just said almost reminds me of an interview I saw with the CEO of NVIDIA. He's like, if you told me how hard it was going to be when I first started this, I would not have done this. If you told me everything I was going to deal with for, the past decade starting this company, like I would not have done this. But that's the cool thing about what entrepreneurs are, is like they kind of get into this. I don't want to say ignorantly, but they don't know everything that's going to be thrown at them over the course of their career. And I think that's kind of the brilliance of all of this. It's like you go at this and you go through it with this idea of a better tomorrow, not necessarily thinking about all the bad things that are going to happen to you, like your $20 million company getting shut down overnight. You're not thinking about that when you get started. You're thinking of the better tomorrow that you're going to bring these people.
You have to be optimistic. There's no choice but to be optimistic, right? If you're not, you're just going to hear no so often, especially in the early days and years, that if you're not optimistic, you're not going to even get 3 months into a startup, right? Like you have no choice but to kind of trick your brain that the next good thing is just around the corner. And I think also, this is sort of put all the caveats around this advice, but I think, for me, an entrepreneur, someone I know who I really respect, who actually was a CEO of a company who had a product at b8ta, which is how I got to know him initially. Before I did my last startup, which was very short-lived, but his advice certainly rang true. I was very worried about being a founder again, and the risks that come along with that. And basically he said, if it doesn't work, you just go get a job. It's not that risky, right? Like, as long as you're not breaking the law or doing anything nefarious, like if you start a company and it doesn't work, nobody dies. You just go get a job, right? Or start the next thing, right? I think that was like, as simple as that advice sounds, it really hit me like, oh, you're right. Like, what is the worst thing that can happen? If it doesn't work, I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to get arrested if I start a company that fails, right? Now, obviously you want to make sure that like financially you can afford to do it and all those different things, right? But I think that advice really hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, yeah, you're right. Like, this doesn't work. Like, just go get a job somewhere, or I'll just try to start something else, right? So I think that when it comes to the founder mentality and being comfortable with risk and being comfortable with things you can't control, I think when you fast forward to the worst case scenario, what's the worst case scenario here? My company shuts down and I got to find another way to make money. That actually doesn't sound that bad, right? Once you've gotten there mentally, it's like, okay, well, then I've already prepared myself for this might not work. And if it doesn't work, I'll just need to find another way to make money. Cool. Then nothing can be that scary if I've already fast forwarded to the worst possible thing that can happen, right?
Especially because when you're thinking about starting a company, your alternative is already finding a job. And so...
Exactly. You're right back where you started.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. And despite... you talked about getting a ton of no's, and that definitely happens. But you've also gotten a lot of yeses, right? $2 million deals with Fortune 50 companies, stuff like that. What do you think is the key to getting that? Well, key to telling a good story and selling a product or yourself or an idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now, a lot of my current company has roots in b8ta. And the reason is because of the position I was in, because of where we were at with b8ta, I met with, probably over the course of the last 8 years, I've met with over 1,000 founders. And in that time, I got to really observe how founders talk about their business, how they tell their story, right? And especially at b8ta, seeing physical products that have really cool features and functionality, as I look back on it, the coolest products, the technically most proficient products were not the ones that succeeded. Obviously there were some of those, but it wasn't the reason they succeeded. It was because they told the right story, right? They understood who their customer was, right? They started with the why. They understood the problem they solve. Who do they solve it for? And how is their solution better than the alternative, right? Like, simple as that. Like, those were by far the products that people bought, the brands that became unicorns, that became successful because they told a good story, right? They didn't try to tell this mythical, we're changing the world story. They said, hey, we know that, this type of person has a specific problem. We know that our solution solves it, and we solve it better than the competition, right? I think that formula is the way that businesses really grow and succeed. And I think the natural inclination, the most common mistake, especially with what I saw at b8ta, but across my career, founders, especially technical founders, love to trumpet the features and benefits of their product, right? Especially if you're building a technology company, a software company, hardware company, you've put blood, sweat, and tears into making something so incredibly cool and revolutionary that does something that no product has ever done. All you want to talk about is that, right? And the truth is, nobody cares about that,
Yeah.
right? And it's impossible to realize that when you're completely in your echo chamber, 80, 90, 100 hours a week, all you're doing is building this product, right? You assume that everyone's brain works the way yours work, and you want to talk to everybody about all the different LLM models and ways that you're using machine learning and all the platforms you're built on and all the APIs you have and everything you integrate with, and nobody cares about any of that. And it's really hard to get out of that mindset. But by far, right, my experience has been the brands, the founders that are the best at telling their story are the ones that are the most successful. So to compare it to b8ta, we told a great story. We were kind of saving retail, right? Physical, brick and mortar retail was in a really bad spot when b8ta was kind of doing our best. And we were sort of this white knight who was saving retail. We were saying, hey, going into stores sucks, but not at b8ta, right? And so we told that story, and it resonated. We were only really telling it to small brands, but to your point of signing, Fortune 50 companies, it started to resonate with the big brands too, and they started to flock to us. So I think we talked about ups and downs and things like that. I'm a big believer that we learn more from the downs than the ups, and so I think for me, being able to see front row a good story versus a bad story, the bad stories always stood out as, wow, these guys are missing a huge opportunity. They are not talking about this in the right way. And so I think, just making sure you understand your audience, you understand what they're going through, and you understand how to properly position what you're doing. How you're doing it, frankly, is secondary a lot of the time.
Yeah, we've heard other founders talk about how you're not supposed to talk about the features because, as you were saying, nobody cares, and it seems like, well, we had a copywriter on it, and he was telling us that oftentimes with these B2B SaaSes, the mistakes that they make is they play the feature game, and what he was saying is what you need to do is you need to tailor it to like what kind of person they are, and you need to say like this is the need that you're looking to solve. Like, you're the kind of person that deals with scheduling issues if you're some sort of AI calendar or whatever, and he says to sort of shift it to the you, like you're this kind of person, you're looking for this. And when you guys are telling these stories, and that seems like what you do is that F3 Collective you guys do over there. You guys
that's
help
right now.
Yeah, you guys help these founders tell a better story in that way, or
Yeah, I mean, I think storytelling, is very much kind of a catch-all term. I think it took me a while to sort of hone in how to say what I do in sort of one word or one sentence. Part of what I do is connected to go-to-market strategy, sales, partnerships. But ultimately, my job and what I help companies do is anytime, whether it's a founder or an employee, anytime someone is opening their mouth talking about what you do, the story should be owned, right? The story is this is why we exist. This is who we exist for. And I think that is the way that people hear a pitch from a business, right? They want to know, who is this for? Is it for me? And if they say it's for me, do they actually understand, right? Gavin, to your point, do they understand if I'm having scheduling issues, right? Do they understand what I'm dealing with, right? Because you're not going to be able to build a product for me unless you can prove to me that you understand what I'm going through, right? If you don't know what my problem is, then you don't really have any credibility to say, hey, like, I'm going to be able to fix it. If you don't know what the problem is, how the hell could you fix it, right? So I think putting yourself in the shoes, right, of your customer, right, when you're telling your story of your business, the hero of the story is not your company, is not your product, it's your customer, right? Your customer is the hero of your story. And I think without fail, the best ads, you see a TV ad or a YouTube ad for a brand, right? The best versions of those, the ones that actually make you go, oh shit, I think I need this product. By far, they're making you the hero of the story. And oftentimes we don't even realize it, right? I think that's like, it's almost like we get Jedi mind tricked when there's a really, really good story being told, that we're being kind of put on this pedestal as the hero. And we're like, man, I like those guys. They know what they're talking about. Well, it's because they're making you seem like a hero. That's why you like them. They've proven to you they understand the shoes you're walking in, right? So I think, you're absolutely right. You being the customer, being front and center. I think that has to be, the way that brands are communicating their message. And that's on your website, that's in your pitch deck, that's, in pitch meetings, that's if a founder's giving a keynote, right? Like, this is anytime your brand is being talked about, this story has to fit that mold.
And so in forming these partnerships and telling your story, how do you prioritize partnerships? Let's say there's a really big company, but they're just not getting it. How much should you focus on trying to adjust your messaging and trying to get them on board versus focusing on someone else who's smaller but gets it and is ready to go?
Are you talking about for my business today, or you mean kind of generally speaking?
Kind of generally, but if you want to talk about your business right now, yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, right, there's only so many hours in the day, and we all have kind of revenue targets that we're trying to hit, right? So for me, it's a math problem, right? Like, if you have a $100,000 monthly goal that you're trying to hit, if you want to pitch 4 brands for $100K each, and you believe 1 in 4 is going to close, go for it, right? If you can get 10K in 2 days, well, just go do that 10 times and you're at your goal, right? I'm obviously making something complex seem way more simple than it is, but I think it's just turning it into a math problem, right? Understanding, the likelihood. And I think a mistake, I think especially in the software sales world, a mistake that people make is overinflating the chance that something's going to close, right? We just talked about being optimistic as a founder, right? I think, there's a benefit to being pessimistic with regards to sales and the likelihood that something's going to close, right? There's never been a person that had too much in their pipeline. It's not a thing, right? So, when it comes to closing deals and prioritizing partnerships, something that I've personally struggled with, and I know a lot of people do, is, okay, I've got a couple deals in the pipeline. They both look really good. I'm going to take my foot off the gas a little bit, right? One of these deals is going to happen. Actually, they're both probably going to happen. I'm going to crush my goal, right? Fast forward 24 hours later, you get 2 no emails, and now you're screwed, right? So I think when it comes to prioritizing deals based on the size and the length of the deal cycle, I think the most important thing you can do is be very honest about the likelihood that something is going to happen, right? And always build in some insurance into the equation, because 99% might as well be 0% in some cases, right?
Yeah, and so as you're closing these larger deals, is there any advice for founders? Like, you've closed deals with Fortune 50 companies, and so what does that look like? What is the process of forming those connections look like and telling your story that way?
Yeah, I think when it comes to larger deals with a more enterprise type company, I mean, there's 2 things, right? The first thing is having relationships cross-functionally with the prospect, right? I think the most common way that a deal like that goes awry is your contact gets a different job or they get fired, right? If you're relying on one person to be the contact that makes a 7-figure deal happen, people change jobs all the time, right? And this person, although you may have built rapport with them and they feel like they're really in your corner and they're going to make this happen, they're looking out for themselves. If they're looking for another job, they're not going to be like, oh, well, I know John's really counting on this $1 million deal. Nobody cares, right? People are worrying about themselves. So the more people that you have relationships with on the other side of the table, the more likelihood you are to be able to weather the storm if one person leaves or if the CEO changes or what have you, right? I think also the more people you meet, the more discovery you can do, the more you can understand exactly what your solution needs to look like and make sure that you've handled all objections, right? If you're only working with one person and they're sort of gatekeeping the rest of the organization, and you ask for introductions and they won't give them, that's a huge red flag, right? If they're keeping this to themselves, chances are they're not even a decision maker. They're going to need to run it by somebody else. So the first part of making sure you have success with these bigger deals is just having a ton of different relationships, ideally in different departments across the organization, right? Like
Nice.
That's increasing your chances to succeed. And then beyond that, it's getting your internal resources ready to support this client, right? I think for in the case of the deal that you're referencing that I did at b8ta, 3-4 months before they even signed their contract, I had people at b8ta read in on the situation. They knew what we were trying to do. There were some preparations already being made, right? Even though we didn't have the deal, we didn't want to waste those resources. We wanted to be prepared so we could hit the ground running on day one, right? So, if a good salesperson is doing sometimes as much work internally as they are externally, right? You want to set your team up for success to deliver on what you sold.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
And then we've talked a lot about building partnerships with customers, but what about you mentioned building a team within b8ta to reach out to brands and choosing the people you work with, your co-founder, right? What do you look for there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on the stage, of the company, right? I think in the very earliest days of b8ta, of any startup, you need people that are comfortable with risk, probably comfortable not being paid, a fair market wage, frankly, right? People who believe in the mission of your company, people who are excited about what you're doing, right? At b8ta, we used to have people go to the store and just shop and send us kind of a note with their impressions. What did they think of the store? What was their favorite product? Stuff like that. That was sort of a litmus test that we used to see, okay, does this person really care, or are they just going to punch a clock? I think the passion's a must for an early stage company. I mean, if you can't pay them a fair market wage, they need to at least be excited about what you're doing to sort of compensate for that. I think early stage also just being comfortable working a lot, right? That's just the reality of an early stage startup. You have to work a lot. That doesn't work for everybody, right? Like personally, like I'm not a good fit for an early stage startup right now. Like I'm not trying to work 60 hours a week. To be honest, most weeks I'm not trying to work 40, right? So I'm where I'm at in my life right now. I never could have done what I did at b8ta 10 years ago. But back then I was the perfect fit. Didn't have a girlfriend, didn't have a wife, didn't have anything going on. I immersed myself in work. Early stage startup, that's just a fact, and it's not for everybody. So if you're building a team early stage, that's what you need. As the company grows, right, you start to look for people that are a little bit more credible, right, that have some experience at larger companies, because now it's about making this business scalable, making it a little bit more professional, polishing up a lot of the internal processes, right? Like that is what you need as the company grows and revenue builds, because eventually in an ideal world, you're working towards an IPO, an acquisition, something like that. And you need people there who have been through something like that, who can make sure that your business is prepared to take that next step. So I think the needs in terms of building a team very much kind of evolve with the growth of an organization.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're in an early stage startup, what's your opinion on hire fast, fire fast?
I mean, I'm a huge proponent of that, to be honest. I
Okay.
think that I never quite figured out the interview process in terms of interviewing folks. I think people do a very good job of putting their best face on in an interview. And, we got fooled a few times with people that interviewed incredibly well. And sometimes on their first day, we were like, oh, this is bad, right? But we did not really fire maybe fast enough in some cases. But yeah, I think I'm kind of a big gut instinct guy. I tend to just go with what I feel. And so hire fast would certainly work for me. And the same thing with fire fast. Like, if on day one, someone's having trouble getting their Gmail set up, my antenna are going to be up and this is a bit of a rabbit hole topic, right? I don't want to be breaking any employment law rules or anything like that. But in general, the concept of hire fast, fire fast, I think is a must. You don't have time to waste if you're an early stage company. You don't have time to waste. You don't have money to waste. There's not time to be hand holding people at that stage. So if you can't just jump in, then it's probably not fit.
Okay.
And then, I mean, you've worked for 3 really, really awesome startups, probably more depending on what F3 does and everything else. Are there any patterns you notice in these really great startups? You mentioned telling a great story is essential. Is there anything else, either in the organization or what they do somehow, that you think makes a great startup that people can learn from?
I think really leadership being open-minded is a very key. I think, across startups that I've worked for, that I've engaged with, I think leaders who are, the old, crappy cliche is my door is always open, right? But I think I'm a big proponent of strong opinions loosely held, right? Which means I really am going to be a staunch believer in what I believe, but I'm also going to keep one ear open if someone has a different idea, or if somebody wants to poke holes in what I'm doing. I'm always going to listen, right? So I think that's a really consistent thread. Leadership being open-minded and being open to contribution from anyone across the organization, right? I think there's, you never know who's going to come up to you with the next great idea. And so I think not being too set in one's ways, being open to change and make a left turn if the right idea is presented. I think too often leaders really dig their heels in. They say, well, I'm CEO, I'm CFO, I know better than anybody. I think that can be dangerous. So just being open-minded from a leadership perspective, that also funnels its way down to the organization, right? Any mentality that the leaders of the company have is good or bad is going to filter down. So that open-mindedness, I think, is a key to success in my experience.
Yeah. And that, I think it's essentially just becoming fascinated with the problem instead of the solution, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. If you keep the problem at the forefront, right, you everything you do is in service of that problem.
Exactly.
You're going to be more open to ideas than if you're too focused on the solution.
Yeah. And as a founder, have you found ways in which, I don't know how big the teams you were working on were, but have you found ways in which you're accessible, like you were saying, open door policy, like making the ideas from people at the very bottom, like, are those ideas getting to you in a timely manner? And because I think it's important to hear everybody out and work in sync with each other, right? And make sure that if there is an idea that could be benefiting you guys in any way, shape, or form, it should be at the forefront, right? Is there sort of a system that you've had in place to help foster that kind of environment, or?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest answer in terms of an actual, product we use, like b8ta was huge on Slack. All of our stores had Slack.
Nice.
Every employee who worked in a store had Slack. So anybody could Slack anybody at b8ta. We had specific channels where particular ideas could be posted and we could collaborate that way, but you could also DM anybody. we had specific store channels that had a feed of sales that were going on real time in the stores. If a celebrity or something came in the store, an associate could post like, "Hey, so and so is here. What should I do?" So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Slack as a collaboration tool just in general, and for us, that just provided a direct line to anybody at the company to have their voice heard, instantly. And so yeah, I'm a huge fan of Slack. I think especially in a more increasingly remote world, I think it allows people to collaborate instantly in a way that maybe we didn't do as good of a job at before.
Awesome, yeah. And so, I mean, I was thinking about that as Gavin asked that question, and my thought was just these like big meetings with everyone in them that wouldn't be effective because no one wants to speak
that's
up.
Time waster.
And you don't have time to do one-on-one with everyone, but with Slack you do. With technology, there's such a simple solution to what could be a difficult problem.
Yeah, and I think especially in person, I mean, we had town halls and things like that, and I think the truth is like a lot of people are shy to speak up, in a public forum, right? Like they don't want to raise their hand, and so Slack provides a little bit more of a confidential or risk-free way of raising your hand, right? If you have a bad idea, the whole company's not going to hear it, right?
Yeah.
So I agree. I think there are obviously, ways to do town halls and have them be successful, but I think doing something a little more private like Slack at least gives people the freedom to speak freely. And if they're wrong or it's a bad idea, then nothing, just move on.
And I think on top of that too, it allows you to almost perfectly craft that question. I know it's small and you could pick the wording, but I think it's important too that you word it right. And just having that in writing, I think is crucial. But yeah.
And I guess kind of last question before we wrap up to rapid fire. I'm curious what's next for you and what you think is next for like startups in general. Like, what are you sort of working on now and how do you think that will affect things to come?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm working on. I've been doing my business F3 Collective for the last year. Briefly tried to do a SaaS startup last year with the technical co-founder. Long story short, we gave back half our funding and shut that company down rather unexpectedly. And last summer, I basically found myself needing to keep working with not expecting that I would need to do that, and pretty much said, "What's the quickest business I can start?" Probably it's a service-based business. All I have to do is file an LLC, spin up a website, and start working. And so wasn't necessarily planning on starting a service-based business, but it was the quickest business I could start. And it allows me to work with a lot of different companies at once in tackling the storytelling problem that, as you guys can tell, I'm super passionate about, right? There's a very specific thing that I love to do, and the business that I'm running today allows me to do it repeatedly, do it with one company, move on, right? Put a story together for a company, make sure they're comfortable, telling that story to the world, and then I get to move on, right? I get to do a lot of different things, a given week. The variety of companies that I'm talking to is vast, and that's my comfort zone. I love talking to a lot of different founders, hearing different perspective, and helping them tell their stories. So offering that service to, usually kind of pre-seed to Series A stage companies. That's what I do today. And that's kind of the mission I'm on, is just, I think, is just really, help founders get out of the echo chamber, right? Help them craft that right message for their audience. And so, for the, hopefully indefinitely, that's what I'll be doing. That's the plan. I really enjoy what I'm doing, and hope to keep meeting more founders and help them on that journey. Awesome.
And that was F3 Collective for anyone listening. If you
That's
feel
right.
You need
funfairfast.com is the URL.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into rapid fire. Just 6 questions. We say keep it under 30 seconds, but that's a very loose guideline. And the first one is, how much sleep do you get?
Well, thankfully, if you asked me this 2 years ago, it would have been not a lot. I have a daughter who's almost 3. So I used to not get very much sleep because of her, but she sleeps 12 hours a night now. So sleep is very important to me. I would say I get 8 hours of sleep on average.
Awesome.
That's good. What's your favorite book and why?
I think I actually have it on my desk here. Yeah. There's a curse word in it, but it's This book is it's called the Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a F. I won't say the curse word. Yeah, just like going back to control what you can control. I think this is it's kind of written as satire, but it has a lot of like really practical advice to it. I think just really not wasting your time worrying about things that aren't worth your time is an incredibly powerful gift. And so this is probably my third time reading this book. I'm a huge fan of it. So that would be the book I would choose.
Awesome. What would be your advice to young people, right? You're back before beta. You just moved to San Francisco. What would you tell yourself? I'm biased, but I would say work in sales. Get a sales job, whether that is, selling clothes at a retail store or selling software or, working on a car lot. I think sales has a very negative connotation to a lot of people who don't want to really admit that sales is happening 24/7, 365. If you can get good at sales, that skill set is going to serve you for the rest of your life.
What's most important to you in life?
My girls, my wife and daughter, by far.
Of course. If you could change anything about the world, what would it be?
Oof, man. I just think despite it being easier to communicate than ever, I think there's just miscommunications galore. And I think I would, it's not an easy fix, but I would make it easier for people to communicate their differences with one another. I think people are a lot more similar than they are different. But somehow we're not able to communicate that effectively.
And last one here. How do you want to be remembered?
I would say I want to be remembered as somebody who would run through a wall for the people that he cares about. That would be my answer there.
That's awesome. And I definitely can see you doing that. I really appreciate, and I think that's a fantastic place to leave off with, the story of b8ta and all the both awesome stuff that you did and the hardships, and then talking a bit more about strategy and how you can continue doing this and now doing what you love, telling these stories. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, John.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm glad all of you stuck around for this. I think John had some great insights. And so if you want to see more of this, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week, Tuesday at noon. Don't be late.